We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
When Armstrong said that's one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind, I think that the footprint that he was leaving was in Area 51, north of Las Vegas, Nevada. They had to fake the moon landings because they knew successful trips to the moon and returns could not be made.
They were producing a production, a showpiece, if you will.
I really believe that they weren't in the command capsule at launch. They did a little bit of a magician act with the astronauts. They went up the elevator, but they came down the elevator. In other words, they did not want to risk the lives of the astronauts in case the Saturn blew up.
There is absolutely no way they went to the moon with what they had. In fact, there's no way they can go today. There's no way they can go tomorrow. You don't send man where you haven't sent the monkey.
Those photographs can be demonstrated not to have been taken on the lunar surface. Now, if they were not taken on the lunar surface, there's only one other place they could have been taken, and that's on Earth.
But the skeptics claim NASA faced an uphill struggle. They could not guarantee success with the apparently primitive technology of the 1960s. This was brought into sharp focus just 14 months before the mission, when Neil Armstrong test-piloted a prototype landing module.
Unfortunately, it went out of his control, and luckily he was able to eject before it crashed in flames. And of course, the point is, if they couldn't get a simulator to work on Earth, how in the world could they get the actual lunar module to work on the moon? I do not think it was feasible for the astronauts to take the wonderful pictures that NASA has presented as having been taken on the moon. There are so many impediments that were natural. The fact that they wore gloves that couldn't be manipulated, the fact that they didn't have any sources of light, any flash.
Ralph Rene also believes the design of the Apollo suits would have prevented the astronauts operating anything as delicate as a camera. To prove the point, he's designed a space glove machine, which is supposed to replicate the effects of space on the body.
In the near vacuum of space, the gases within his body would immediately expand.
What I do is I pull a vacuum in this chamber I created, and I have a glove inserted inside of it. And it was to prove that the flexibility they shown in their suits and gloves are impossible. Right now, I can put my hand in there and I can move it every which way. I can grasp, I make a fist, I can lift up, down. But as soon as I throw this switch here, I evacuate the chamber.
As the air is sucked out of the machine, the vacuum makes the glove increasingly difficult to flex.
And this glove doesn't want to move. I can't bend it backwards. I can hardly force it down, and I can make a fist, but you can't hold it. And you could never pick, I mean, how could you pick up small screws and bolts like they've shown them to do, or trigger a little tiny trigger on a camera with the glove doing this?
According to the conspiracy theorists, this was a major impediment.
This is where the shutter is on the Hasselblad camera, which cannot be seen from inside the helmet the astronauts are wearing. So how do they know they've taken a photograph? How do they know their fingers even got onto the shutter? How do they know they pressed it?
But even if you accept that photographs could physically have been taken on the moon, you're still left with the most famous of the apparent photographic anomalies, the shadows.
The shadows are one of the strong proofs that we never went to the moon. If you examine pictures offered by NASA as genuine, you find that in many cases the shadows are not parallel. Well, since the sun was the only source of light, all shadows on the moon should be exactly parallel, but they aren't.
The lunar shadows sometimes fall in different directions. The skeptics claim this as incontrovertible evidence of at least 2 light sources.
There's only one sun. There are not 2. But these shadows are anomalous in that sometimes they are diverging from objects and sometimes converging. And it can't be. You can go any place on this planet when the sun's up and you look at 2 objects and those sun shadows are parallel.
The skeptics have also called into question areas that should be in shade, claiming a second light has been used to highlight areas that should have been a dense black.
Well, let's have a look at one of the most famous photographs of the 20th century, Man on the Moon. It was taken by Neil Armstrong of Buzz Aldrin on Apollo 11. Given that it's very harsh light, as you can see here, where it strikes directly, you would expect the shadow area to be virtually invisible, but it's not.
The symbolic highlight of Apollo, the planting of the American flag, has also generated deep suspicion.
Wherever there's an American flag, it's always brilliantly lit up, even if it's on the shadow side. And on the shadow side, that should be really dark black. But they had little spotlights, obviously, because that's the only way you can do it.
Oh, geez, that's great. Is the lighting halfway decent?
But this does not explain how a flag can wave in a windless environment.
When they were filming some of the flag scenes, they had air conditioners going to keep the astronauts cooler since they were wearing their little space suits. So it's very possible that what we saw was wind.
But decreased gravity and the lack of atmosphere can't provide an explanation for the next apparent blunder. When the 16-ton Eagle touched down, it should, claim the skeptics, have disturbed the surface of the moon, blowing the top layer of dust away to expose the rock beneath. But the images show footprints clearly imprinted around the base of the spacecraft. Surely the dust would have blown away, or worse.
This enormously powerful jet of flame and heat and gas, it would have easily scooped up an enormous crater. In fact, there was supposition that the crater would have been so big that the lunar lander would have disappeared into it. That's true.
But the most intriguing anomaly has to be the absence of the largest, most stunning object seen in space. In a sky untouched by streetlights, atmosphere, or pollution, the view of the night sky should be spectacular. But incredibly, stars appear to be missing from the Apollo photographs.
Back then, fortunately for me and us, who are trying to break this thing out, the truth, they took no pictures of the stars.
Bill Kaysing believes that omitting the stars was all part of NASA's deception.
Astronomers could have easily discerned that the star positions were not those that would have appeared in a photograph taken from the moon. So it's another case where they could not fake it, so they simply ignored it. If you were to talk to Aldrin or Armstrong or any of the other Apollo astronauts, they would actually not respond in any way to questions regarding stars.
But still, the skeptics refuse to lie down and roll over. A mysterious rock in a notorious Apollo 16 photograph has only added fuel to the fire.
It's a rock that obviously was made out of paper mache, and very clearly on the rock is the letter C.
Ralph Renee believes the C rock was probably the C prop.
Somebody told me that in Hollywood, when they do a set, the set manager comes around and drops cards on the ground, and it says A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, or 1 to 10 or whatever, and the prop men, whatever you call these people, they come out and they put that particular prop over the card. But in Hollywood, they're smart enough to turn the thing upside down so you can't see the mark on the prop.
NASA simply claims that this photo was a freak accident, that the C is in fact a hair on the negative. But this nitpicking over photographs is irrelevant for magazine publisher Marcus Allen. He's convinced that no photographic film could possibly have survived the journey to the moon and back in the first place.
In an unprotected camera, in unprotected environment, and the films that were in photographs we have seen as a result of that, It demonstrates absolutely no radiation damage whatsoever.
In total, the Apollo missions brought back over 382 kilograms of lunar soil and rock samples, which were distributed to laboratories all over the world.
The lunar rocks were fake, just like the pictures were in the stories of the astronauts. NASA has a ceramics laboratory where it would have been very easy to produce the 800 pounds of rocks allegedly brought back from the moon.
Not only that, on leaving the Earth's atmosphere, the astronauts had to negotiate the Van Allen belts.
Van Allen, he said it was a sea of deadly radiation. You would pick up a death dose just about the time you got through the Van Allen shield. You'd be cooked and you'd be dying.
These radioactive belts form a thick invisible ring around the Earth's equator, thinning out around the North and South poles.
Until they get an engine that'll lift the life capsule surrounded by 6 feet of water or equivalent mass of lead, they don't even dare go through the Van Allen shield. So here we have these clowns running around in tinfoil craft stopping solar radiation. And I'm not talking about the light, I'm talking about the radiation from the solar storms.
You put a man in a powerful solar flare, he's dead. End of story, he is dead. Unless he carries protection.
When you land on the moon, you're practically standing still being bombarded with all this solar radiation and smacking into you, which is why they had to hide the whole thing, because it just can't be done. It couldn't be done then, can't be done today, and it sure isn't going to be done in the future when they're planning on this manned mission to Mars.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap. So, I guess you want to do it again. Okay. Sorry, Mr. Washington.
Orion is getting ready to launch. My name is Kelly Smith, and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. Orion is NASA's next-generation spacecraft. Built with versatility in mind, it can take astronauts deeper into space than we've ever gone before, to an asteroid or even onto Mars. For these missions, Orion has to be one tough spacecraft, withstanding high speeds, searing temperatures, and extreme radiation. Before we can send astronauts into space on Orion, we have to test all of its systems. And there's only one way to know if we got it right: fly it in space. For Orion's first flight, no astronauts will be aboard. The spacecraft is loaded with sensors to record and measure all aspects of the flight in every detail. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. But Orion has protection. Shielding will be put to the test as the vehicle cuts through the waves of radiation. Sensors aboard will record radiation levels for scientists to study. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. For this flight, it's time to head home.